everyone, thanks for coming back for part 2. I just wanted to make a correction to my last video. I had accidentally said 12 churches when I meant to say 7 churches. There was 12 cities. I think it's showing 11 over here if I counted correctly. It says this is the location of some of the affected towns and cities in Asia from the earthquake that took place in AD 17, so it affected this entire area over here, which is where the 7 churches are located. And as you can see, a lot of the churches, almost all of them, show up over here. You see Pergamum, Smyrna, or actually Smyrna's over here, Sardis, Philadelphia, Ephesus, and some of these names may vary and actually be the same as the cities that are on here, but you can see it's the same area that was affected. I also realize that this microphone doesn't sound very good, so I'll probably have to return it, but I wanted to just go ahead and share this information anyway, so if you can just bear with me. Okay, so as I said in my last video, I couldn't understand why God seems to be confirming this year as being the year of creation, which leads to 17 AD as being the date of the crucifixion, as well as 27 AD being the date of the Lord's coming. Seems like God is confirming both in very profound ways, so I couldn't understand why God would be confirming 2 different time frames. So it's almost as if there's some kind of a time warp. So I thought I would do a table with the word time warp. And at first I had put in 10 years lost, and then I realized that it's actually 10 years gained, but it's actually more than 10 years. It's more like 13 and a half, but this is what I had put in, and it came up with one match. So I think it's interesting that the word gained came up in ELS form. I mean, all of these words came up in ELS form. And this came up in Luke 24. And this is at the time of the Lord's resurrection, when the tomb was discovered empty. I was also reminded of the scriptures where it talks about the king Hezekiah, and over here it says, turn again and tell Hezekiah, the captain of my people, thus saith the Lord, the God, David thy father, I have heard thy prayer, I have seen thy tears, behold, I will heal thee on the 3rd day. It's interesting that it's mentioning the 3rd day here. Thou shalt go up unto the house of the Lord, and I will add unto thee 15 years, and I will deliver thee and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend the city for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And then it's here in verse 27, which looks like the number 27, it says, and Isaiah said, take a lump of figs, and they took and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. So he recovered in verse 7, and Hezekiah said unto Isaiah, what shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up into the house of the Lord on the 3rd day? And Isaiah said, this sign shalt thou have of the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he hath spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees, or go back 10 degrees? And Hezekiah answered, it is a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees, nay, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. And Isaiah the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. Okay, now this word Ahaz is Strong's H217, and it's a form of the word H270, which is the word that I showed in my last video, which means to grasp, take hold, seize, or take possession. And I showed in my last video how in the Greek, the Strong's number for the rapture is 727. See that right here, G727. It's the word arpax, which means to grab or to snatch, and it's the same as the word arpazo, which means to seize, carry off by force, snatch, or take away. So this word is the same word as G727. It's just another form of the word. And then in the Hebrew, it's Strong's number H270. Okay, and I was planning to talk about that, but I didn't even notice that that word was there until I just read that just now. But the point that I wanted to make is that it's over here in 2 Kings 20, verses 6 through 7, where it talks about Hezekiah being healed, and he was given 10 more, or 15 more years, and the dial went back, or time went back 10 degrees. And you see this coming up here in verse 7 is when he recovered. So that looks like 27. And then the other place where it talks about this is the exact same story that's talking about over here, is in 2 Kings 4:17 or 14:17, and 14 is 7 plus 7, so that would be like 77. And then over here you have 17 or 2:17. So again, this looks like 2017 or 27 versus 17, and it's talking about 10 degrees. Okay, so I did a table on the words 10 degrees, and it came up in the book of Joshua, which is the word Yeshua. In the Hebrew is actually pronounced Yeshua. The J in the King James or in the Old English actually sounded like a Y. That's why they used J for Jesus and Joshua, but it's really Yeshua. And so this is coming up in Yeshua 7:17. And it goes through to verse 24. Okay, so what I noticed in this table over here in verse 20, it's also in verse 19 and verse 18, you see the word can. And I actually thought this word, I got it confused with the word has. I thought maybe it might be the same word, so I looked it up. Okay, see that over here, Joshua 7:20. So I looked up the word can, and this word means troubler. So of course that reminded me of the tribulation, the time of trouble. And you see over here saying that it comes from another word, which is 59:17. So again, this one ends in the number 17, and 5, of course, is the number for grace, and 9 is the number for judgment. But it ends in verse number 17, and this word means troubler. And then it comes from this word, which means trouble. So it's interesting that that comes up in a number ending in 17, and it means trouble. And this is coming up in Joshua 7:20, and it was coming up in a table that I did on 10 degrees that came up in Joshua 7:17. And so in this table it has the word can, which means trouble. Okay, so you see that word over here, can, and it means troubler. And the other thing that I noticed, aside from the fact that it's also Strong's 5917, is that it's also coming up in 1 Chronicles 2:7. So again, you have the number 27 over here, and Joshua 7:1, which is where this chapter begins is like the number 17 backwards. So I looked up 1 Chronicles 2:7. Okay, see that over here? It says, in the sons of Carmi, Akar, the troubler of Israel. So I looked up the word Akar, and you see it's Strong's 59:17. Okay, and it's actually only used that 1 time in 1 Chronicles 2:7. And this is another form of the word Akan, which comes up in 7:20. Well, it comes up in this matrix over here a few times, but this is where I noticed it in 7:20. Okay, so what happened is when I saw this word Akan, I got confused with the word Ahaz, which means to snatch or to seize, and I noticed it was coming up in 7:20, and the Hebrew Strongs for snatch or to take away is 2:7. Is 2:70. It's this word right here. It's the word akaz, which means to grasp, seize, or take possession of. And in the Greek, it's 7:27. This word arpax means to grab or to snatch, same as the word arpazo, means the same thing. And in the Hebrew, H727 is the word ark, or the Ark of the Covenant, which is also basically the rapture. I believe it's the restoration of the temple, and that it represents DNA. It's a form of the word 717. So again, you have the numbers 727 and 717, and this means to pluck or gather. Okay, so I had thought of the word Ahaz, and that's before I even knew that was coming up in 2 Kings 20 verse 6. I just noticed that as I was reading the context of this scripture over here about the king Hezekiah, when the time went back 15 years or 10 degrees. Okay, so I wanted to pull this word up so I could look at it again, but I accidentally put in H27 instead of 270. And when I did that, it pulled up this word over here, which is Abidan, which means my father is judge. And so this is H27, and it's coming from this word, which is the first part of the word Abba. And then the second part of this word is H1777, which means, is the word Dan. It's a form of the word Dan, which I've talked about before, and it means to judge. And this is coming up in Strong's 1777. This is the word that's in the Shiloh prophecy that I've talked about before, where it says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path. Okay, and this would be referring to the Antichrist, but it's also referring to Jesus, because Jesus is the judge. It says Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. So you see a duality over here with the word Dan, with the true Messiah, and then the Antichrist. And you see that's coming up in verse 17 in the prophecy in Genesis 49, verses 10, or actually 9 through 17, because 9 is where it says Judah is a lion's whelp and Dan is a lion's whelp. So it's talking about Jesus, but it's also talking about the Antichrist in verse 17. But this is a form of the word Dan, which is H1777. I've also talked before about how it's the first part of this star, the nebula that's in Leo's tail. It's the word Dan, which is Strong's H1777, and it's right by the star in Virgo's head, which is HP577779. And so I just wanted to share these connections with you. I'm running out of time, so I guess I'm going to have to end this video here. So thanks for watching, and God bless you.